With the success of Mega Man X and Capcom's love of money, the logical next step is to make a sequel to it, which they did. 7 in fact, plus Command Mission and Extreme, but I'm not getting into that. I don't really have much to say about X2 going in, to be honest. After the massive critical acclaim of Mega Man X, X2 was met with a mostly, it exists response. People generally like it in my understanding, but it's not overly noteworthy than most. When you knock a game so out of the park like they did with X, it's understandable to not reach those same heights again right away. And personally, I've only played X2 like once back when the Legacy Collection came out. I remember enjoying it, but I don't remember much about the game itself, aside from some of the upgrades being annoying to get. Otherwise, this is a mostly clean slate for me. Let's see what's going on with Mega Man X2. It's been 6 months since Sigma was defeated in X1. The Maverick Revolt is mostly over, but they track down the last of his followers at this abandoned Reploid factory. After the tragic loss of Green Biker Dude and a hilariously easy intro boss, we meet the X-Hunters, who are trying to straight up kill X. They somehow have the parts to Zero, so X has to get the Zero parts back and beat up 8 more Mavericks along the way for no particular reason. It's Mega Man, what else do you expect? X2 has mostly the same structure as X1. 8 bosses, boss weapons that are good against other bosses, upgrades, all that good stuff. But X2 does try to shake things up a bit. A common criticism of classic Mega Man was that they're all kinda samey, especially on NES. Sure, they added charge shots and sliding over time, but the core structure and gameplay was basically the same, so the X series tries to mix things up a bit more. In X2, you've got the X-Hunters to worry about. They show up in different stages in a seemingly random order, and you have to find them in the stage they're currently in and fight them to get a Zero part. That doesn't sound too bad, especially since you only have to worry about 3 of them. The problem is they only show up in stages you haven't been yet, and you have no way of knowing what stage they'll end up in next. Okay, that's not completely true. I think they rotate their stages in a set order, but it's not something you'll figure out just casually playing the game. They also don't tell you where they're going next, which means that the weakness order means nothing unless you're using a guide. My thought process was to not worry about the upgrades or boss weaknesses, as I don't have a real time limit on those. I can do a cleanup at the end, I just need to worry about the X-Hunters. But the X-Hunters are never on the main path, you have to find their special boss store, and in some cases you can be locked out of it, like an Overdrive Ostrich. You need Wheelgator's weapon before you can fight the X-Hunter, so there's a good chance to go there not knowing this and go through the stage, beat the boss, and not fight the X-Hunter, and now there's one less stage they can be in. This isn't the only example. In Magnus Centipede, you have to be quick enough to not only notice this door being here, but also have the reaction time to actually prevent the environment from blocking the door in the first place. And Wire Sponge is hidden below this elevator and can be easily missed, which I did miss. Crystal Snail's X-Hunter room requires you to do some weird shenanigans with the right armor, so that's another one you probably won't notice. Most of these rooms are hidden pretty well. Like, there were multiple times where I went to an X-Hunter stage and completely missed the door because I couldn't find it. Plus, they only show up after you've beaten 2 stages, so this means you really have to pay attention to where these guys are. And if you get unlucky, sometimes they just won't show up anywhere you have left to go. I went in with the mindset of prioritizing fighting the X-Hunters, and I still missed one because the stars didn't align in my favor. Like, I even tried saving beating Ostrich for later because I couldn't beat him without his weakness, and I already got the like parts, but sure enough, the last hunter never showed up at Ostrich. I like the X-Hunters on paper. It gives you a secondary optional objective to work toward. In practice, however, it's too annoying. You can't really plan your route without looking at where they'll be ahead of time. But after doing the endgame cleanup, I did end up finding where most of the X-Hunter doors were. So if I did a second playthrough, I could probably fight all of them with relative ease. What you're supposed to do is find the balance of waiting to fight them when you're stronger, but again, it's hard to do that when you don't know where they'll be. You can look up a guide, but you shouldn't have to do that to figure out how to get a slightly better ending. Especially when you didn't need a guide for anything in the first game. Aside from the Hadouken, but that's more of an Easter egg than an actual upgrade. Now, to be fair, the X-Hunters didn't really affect my enjoyment of X2 that much. Not beating all of them didn't really change anything. I'll get into that later, but missing one of the Hunters didn't make me feel empty and think there's no way that's what happened, like I usually get with bad or worse endings. The X-Hunters could obviously be improved, just having them show up in stages you've already beaten would make them less of a pain in the ass. Again, the way they are now, they're not irritating or anything, but you're not getting the better ending on your first playthrough, that's for sure. Although, the X-Hunters are my only real issue with X2. Aside from maybe stages no longer affecting other stages, like, what the hell? Apparently some of the areas look different on the map screen after you clear stages, but I didn't notice, and it doesn't change the stages themselves at all. The rest of X2 is honestly pretty great. Speaking of stages, let's talk about those. Basically all of them are good. Bubble Crab is probably my favorite out of the bunch. It reminds me of Launch Octopus, where they embraced how fun the water physics are. Flame Stack has you going through a volcano and outrunning rising lava before the volcano erupts. I died to this part more times than I probably should have. Wheelgator takes place on, what is this, a giant battle tank? I don't know. Looks cool though. The background even changes over time if you just stand around and do nothing. That's an awesome detail. I also really like Crystal Snail. Smashing crystals with the right armor was a neat idea. All the crystals everywhere reminded me of Crystal Man stage from Mega Man 5. Wire Sponge and Morph Moth stages aren't anything too special though. Just standard stages. The junkyard becoming a robot graveyard aesthetics they got going on is pretty cool. I mean, these robots look like they're being hanged. Do I really want to finish that sentence with awesome? Anyway, point is, that's pretty neat. Yeah, let's go with that. Neat. Magna Centipede is probably the only annoying one. Kind of a stealth level where you're supposed to avoid these searchlights, but it doesn't really punish you that much. To get the heart tank for this stage, you're supposed to not get caught, so you can wall jump off the security drone, but you can just walk like 2 feet past it regardless. There's also a lot of moving blocks that just end up crushing you. The hit detection on them can be kind of wonky, so I ended up dying a decent amount of times for no real reason. It can end up feeling too much like pure trial and error instead of reacting to oncoming danger. I'm probably just bad at video games, but it was still annoying. Overdrive Ostrich is probably my second least favorite stage, but it's not to say it's bad, I just don't like the motorcycle gimmicks got going on. But it can be completely ignored, but it's kind of short if you do. So it's either an annoying stage or a short stage with nothing interesting going on. There's no in between. The bosses in this game are about what you'd expect. Hit them with your weakness weapon and they're pretty easy. There are a few that are pretty hard without them, but that's about it. I really liked how Morph Moth had 2 phases, but otherwise, no one's really noteworthy. Aside from maybe Magna Centipede, just because sometimes you'll warp to the ceiling, making it really hard to hit him with a silk shot. Oh, and Will Gator takes forever, because you hit him with his weakness and then you have to wait for him to come back out of the water. It's just annoying. The weapons you get from them aren't overly useful either. The Crystal Hunter can crystallize enemies to use as platforms, which is pretty neat, but not as useful as it sounds. The Strike Chain is like a grappling hook that can pull you toward walls. That sounds cool as hell, but the range is short, and it doesn't work very well, so it's actually useless. Weirdly enough, the Bubble Shot is probably the best weapon in this game. It shreds through a lot of enemies and mini-bosses, and if you charge it, you get this bubble shield that lets you jump way higher underwater and does a ton of close range damage. I expected this thing to be a joke weapon, but it actually kicks ass. That's crazy. The Speed Burner also gives you this flame charge attack when charged up, basically giving you a second air dash. I don't know, I'm not quite as familiar with X2 as I am X1, so maybe there was more use for weapons that I don't know about. All I really know is that I mostly just used the X-Buster this playthrough and got through it just fine, so yeah. On the subject of not being too familiar with X2, I decided to play it a bit differently than usual. For a lot of the classic games, I looked up boss weaknesses just to save some headache, but for X2, I decided not to use a guide for anything until the endgame cleanup. What, you want me to fight Sigma balls without all my stuff? That's just madness. So I can't really comment on the amount of backtracking this game truly has, because I did not play this efficiently at all. Out of the 4.5 hours it took me to finish the game, it took me 50 minutes to do the endgame cleanup and refill my sub-tanks and lives. This was because I had no idea what I was doing. The actual cleanup wasn't unfun or tedious though. It's weird, if you know what to do, getting the items in this game is pretty easy for the most part. A few of them are a little too precise for my liking, mainly the heart tank and crab bubble. You need to time your air dashes just right, and you can't really see where the rocket is before he jumps, so you just kind of have to guess whether he'll make it or not. It's possible that I'm just bad at video games, but I couldn't figure out a more reliable way of actually getting to it, even with a guide. Don't get me wrong, there's little consequence for messing it up. It's not hard, just annoying. I'm not sure if I'm even doing it right. A lot of the time I could figure out there was definitely something around here, I just wasn't sure how to get to it. I knew there had to be something above these rockets and wire sponge, but I didn't figure out how to get up there on my own. Had I looked around more, I probably could have, but honestly, whatever. That's on the easier side of the spectrum. A few upgrades are just outright cryptic. To get the armor part in Morph Moth, you have to use the spin wheel on this seemingly normal-looking floor. Like, how was I supposed to realize this was breakable? Or how the heart tank and wire sponge is basically invisible? It's right next to the starting point, but I assume this was just a wall. I guess the indication is you can go through the right pillar, so you can also go through the left one, but it still just looks like a wall to me. There's 2 more annoying ones. I died like 20 times trying to get the heart tank and crystal snail, not knowing you were supposed to tap the hover to extend your airtime like in every video game ever made. I don't know how that went over my head. I know you're supposed to keep the bike for the whole stage and overdrive Ostrich to get the heart tank, but honestly, it's easier to just use a charged speed burner and take to death. Again, when you know what to do, it's all pretty easy to get. There's just some stuff that's harder to figure out than they should be. The rewards are worth it at least. There's a heart tank in every stage, this will be true in later games too. There's 4 sub-tanks to ease the difficulty and 4 armor pieces to power up X. The armor parts all do new things as well, except the arm parts, which is just an extra charge level unless you charge special weapons, same as last time. The biggest one is that since you already start with a dash, the leg parts will let you do a dash in the air, which really comes in handy later on. This is a really nice addition, it gives you a lot more control over yourself. Like, this alone is worth the effort. The body armor not only increases your defense, but also gives you access to the Giga Crush, which is a screen nuke that refills as you take damage from projectiles. But it weirdly doesn't damage bosses, so I don't know what the point of this is. There's maybe one part in the whole game where it's useful, but you still get the increased defense, so can't complain. I can complain about the head parts because it's pretty useless. Not completely, just mostly. You get this radar that tells you where hidden areas and passages are. That's basically it, and you have to activate it manually. The helmet was kind of useless before, but at least had some kind of function. This just tells you about things you can mostly figure out yourself. Keep in mind that it doesn't tell you where upgrades are, just passageways. I can appreciate the thought, but I hardly used it. The only thing left is the endgame. It's not really anything too special, it's at least more interesting than X1's Sigma stages, but not by much. The thing about X2's end stages is that each one has something annoying going on. The first stage has these walls that crush you if you take too long to wall jump off of them. That's fine, it's just the walls that are regularly shaped, so you have to move between them. It's doable, but doing this fast enough can just be annoying. Sometimes I can get it, sometimes I can't. Stage 2 has way too many spike pits. This part with all the rocket pillars is the worst because you have to wait around for them to line up to progress. Considering how fast-paced the game normally is, it's just annoying having to wait around for this one section. Stage 3 has the most annoying annoyance out of all of them. There's this platform that moves in a different direction each time you jump on it, and it just slows the game down too much. The direction it goes in next is predictable at least. That arrow underneath always rotates 90 degrees clockwise, so it'll go up, right, down, then left. But even if it's easy to figure out, it's still annoying and not very fun. Like, surely they could have come up with something other than this weird rocket platform, right? Otherwise, the last real end stage is the obligatory boss rush. Just because. X1 made the boss rush a lot better by having you refight bosses over the course of the end stage instead of all at once, but every game onwards goes back to how it was before, and I will never understand why. I will never understand why this is required to begin with, but if there really was some mandate to do this at Capcom, they figured out a way to make it less annoying. Why would you throw that out? But after beating the X-Hunters in the boss rush, you find out, psych, Sigma's behind everything again. Bizarrely, the final stage is just the beginning of Magna Centipede. Like, I'm struggling to comprehend the thought process behind this. Why bother? Surely modifying this stage to work differently at this point in the game would have taken more effort than to just make a separate stage that's just a boss store and nothing else, right? The first game's final stage was more or less just the boss. I don't see any reason why X2 couldn't do that. There wasn't anything wrong with it. Now, whenever you die to the upcoming 3-phase boss fight, you have to arbitrarily replay a part of the game that you already played. Sigma shows up with a remade Zero who then kicks your ass because this is the only hard part of the fight. It's actually kind of a weird fight. There's a lot of action games where you really need to be moving at all times. It's harder to hit a moving target, you know? But Zero only moves when you move. So if you fight him like a normal video game boss and try to avoid his attacks, he's super hard. But if you stand against the wall and try not to move much, he's fairly doable. You still have to find the right pattern and flow to it, if that makes any sense, but he's weirdly easy when you get the pattern down, while being basically impossible if you don't. It's a pretty interesting fight when you start to think about it. Weirdly enough, in the bad ending where you didn't get all the Zero parts, Zero remembers who he is after a good ass kicking, so he's implied to be his old self again. He's smoking and badly damaged from the fight, but Zero is Zero again. The other two phases aren't so interesting. Sigma is a pretty standard boss, honestly. This fight is kind of like the fight he had with the lightsaber in the first game, but now he has Wolverine claws and his attacks are easier to dodge. As long as you hit him with a Sonic Slicer, it's pretty hard to lose, especially when you have 4 filled sub-tanks. The final phase has Sigma turn into a wireframe for some reason. I guess Capcom wanted to show off their fancy new Super Nintendo graphics chip, so he was a wireframe boss. Sure. Even though we already did this in Magna Centipede stage. This fight also plays in slow motion. This is a good enough time as any to bring this up. X2 tends to slow down a lot more than X1 did. It seems to either play at full speed or half speed without any in between. In X1 it only happened on occasion when a lot of stuff was going on, but here it seems like half the boss fights just slow down inexplicably. It's not enough to make me enjoy the game less, but it's still annoying. Anyway, just hit wireframe Sigma with a strike chain. If you came in with full sub-tanks, you can't lose. Especially since the enemies he spawns can drop health for some reason. Like, why does the final boss drop health pickups? The ending isn't much. Sigma's like,
I am inevitable.
X and Zero stare out into the sunset. We live in a society. By the next game. But what if you actually got all the Zero parts? Zero remembers X and everything that's happened even in the bad ending, so what's the difference? Well, nothing really changes. Sigma has a black armored replica of Zero that the real Zero then destroys and you skip the first phase of the fight. That's it. I don't think the ending text even changes. What's even the point in multiple endings then? It'd be one thing if Zero is now gone forever, meaning the rest of the games couldn't have happened or something, but no, same outcome, different means to get there. That's mainly why I don't feel empty like I usually do with bad endings. I don't know why they did it this way. Mega Man X2 was interesting. Here's the thing, X2 is a pretty great time, but a lot of the new stuff is a bit of a mixed bag. Fine when you know what you're doing, but it pretty much requires you to look up how to actually defeat all the X centers and find all the right upgrades. On a replay where I know where everything is, it's probably not as bad, but getting there isn't quite as smooth as just playing the game normally like with X1. X2 feels a smidge too complicated because of it. Other than that, X2 is more of the same. But when that more of the same is an insanely good game, that's hardly a bad thing. It's still got the amazing core gameplay that plays smooth as silk. X2's aged almost as well as the first game. It just does a little too many weird things for it to be as good as its predecessor. Like even during the more annoying parts that I've mentioned, I was still having fun. That should speak for itself. But ultimately, X2 is just pretty good, but not nearly as good as the first game. There isn't much to say about it beyond that. It's been fun. Take care, everyone.